The night was young, and the party was in full swing. Little did I know, it was about to become the creepiest night of my life. The air was filled with the sound of laughter and clinking glasses, a symphony of joy and celebration. My best friend's birthday party was a lively affair, a carousel of familiar faces, sprinkled with the warmth of camaraderie. The cake was cut, gifts were exchanged, and we all reveled in the shared merriment. Tales were spun, jokes were shared, and the night painted a picturesque tableau of a perfect festivity. As the clock hands inched towards late night, I decided to call it a day. With a heart full of cheer and a mind full of memories, I bid my friends goodbye. As I stepped out into the quiet night, the echo of laughter still trailing behind me, I was blissfully unaware of the terror that awaited me. I hopped into my car, the night was pitch black and the roads were deserted. An eerie feeling swept over me, but I brushed it off, attributing it to the aftermath of the celebratory drinks in the late hour. The car's engine roared to life, breaking the silence of the night. The headlight beams cut through the darkness, revealing the empty road ahead. The drive home was always a familiar one, but tonight it felt different, almost alien. The usual hustle and bustle of life was replaced by an unnerving quiet. The city had retired for the day, leaving me alone with my thoughts in the open road. The streets seemed to stretch endlessly, the rows of houses standing solemnly under the dimly lit lampposts, their darkened windows mirroring the night. As I turned onto the country road leading to my house, the urban landscape faded away, replaced by towering trees that loomed ominously over the road. Their branches rustled softly in the wind, whispering secrets into the night. The moonlight filtered through the leaves, casting dancing shadows on the road. The rhythmic thump of the car's tires over the uneven path was the only sound that accompanied me. The tranquility of the drive was punctuated by the occasional flicker of the dash lights, and the soft hum of the radio, playing a forgotten tune. The solitude was almost comforting, a stark contrast to the earlier cacophony of the party. Yet the eerie ambience hung in the air like a shroud, a constant reminder of my isolation. As I maneuvered through the winding road, the shadows seemed to grow darker, the silence deeper. The world outside my car window was a symphony of black and gray, a hauntingly beautiful tableau of the night. As I drove on, the radio humming softly, I glanced at the rearview mirror and froze. There was someone in the back seat. My heart pounded in my chest. The figure in the back seat was silent, motionless. I could feel its eyes on me. Their gaze felt like a cold hand reaching out, tracing a path down my spine. I could almost hear it whispering in the silence, the quiet hum of the engine punctuating the eerie stillness that filled the car. A chill wind swept through the cracked window, rustling the figure's clothing. It was a sound I knew all too well, the rustle of fabric against leather, the soft creak of the seat beneath a weight. But this was different, disconcerting, a cruel mockery of a familiar comfort. My mind raced as fast as my heart, teetering on the brink of panic. "Keep it together," I whispered to myself, my voice barely audible above the low hum of the engine. "You need to think." But thinking was the last thing I wanted to do. I wanted to scream, to swerve, to jump out of the moving car and let the figure take it, take everything. But I couldn't. I had to keep driving. The road stretched out before me, an endless black ribbon disappearing into the night. I was alone, save for the silent figure in the back seat. The dread was palpable, a living thing that twisted in my gut, gnawing at my resolve. It was a monster that fed on fear, growing stronger with each passing second, yet the figure remained still, silent. The tension was unbearable, the suspense a sharp knife that cut through the darkness. Every second felt like an eternity, each moment a lifetime. I was trapped in a nightmare, held hostage by my own terror. I decided that I couldn't let this fear control me. I needed to face this, to confront the unknown. Summoning every ounce of courage I had left, I gripped the steering wheel tighter. My knuckles turned white under the strain, mirroring the stark terror that gripped my heart. I decided to confront it. I took a deep breath, turned around, and the figure in the back seat was a bunch of balloons from the party, their shadows contorting into a menacing figure in the dim light. A wave of relief washed over me, a stark contrast to the fear that had been gripping my heart only moments ago. I could feel my muscles beginning to relax, the tension ebbing away as I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Suddenly the terror of the situation was replaced with a sense of absurdity. I chuckled, then laughed out loud, the sound echoing in the confined space of the car, a stark contrast to the eerie silence that had pervaded earlier. Who would have thought that harmless party balloons could transform into objects of terror in the right circumstances? My laughter subsided, replaced by a sigh of relief. It was just a silly misunderstanding, a trick played by my mind, fueled by the ominous shadows and the loneliness of the night drive. But even as I drove on, a laugh here and there as I thought about the ridiculousness of the situation, there was something that refused to leave my mind, a nagging feeling, a persistent sense of unease that I couldn't quite shake off. Despite the revelation, despite the laughter and the relief, I couldn't shake off the feeling of being watched. It was as if eyes were still on me, as if I was still not alone. I tried to dismiss it, telling myself it was just the remnants of my earlier scare. As I reached home, the familiar sight of my house brought a new wave of relief. The driveway, the front porch, the welcoming glow of the lights inside, they all promised safety and normality. I laughed it off, shaking my head at my wild imagination. But as I stepped out of the car, the balloons bobbing innocently in the back seat, I couldn't shake off the feeling that I was still not alone. Despite the laughter, despite the relief, the sense of being watched persisted, and somewhere deep within me, a seed of dread began to grow. The night was darker than usual, the kind of darkness that swallows you whole. The empty streets took on an eerie quality, bathed in the faint glow of the occasional streetlight. The only sound was the rhythm of my own footsteps, a steady beat that echoed off the surrounding buildings, seeming to amplify the solitude. Each step I took was a plea to the universe, begging for a taxi to turn the corner. But my pleas fell on deaf ears, swallowed by the inky blackness that stretched endlessly before me. The biting cold of the wind cut through my coat, seeping into my bones, and the shivers it brought seemed to echo my growing unease. The city that never sleeps had fallen into a deep slumber, and I was its lone insomniac, wandering aimlessly through its quiet concrete jungle. Just when I thought I was alone, I noticed her. A woman with long hair, standing on the other side of the road. She was standing so still it was as if she was a part of the night herself. So eerily still, she seemed sculpted from shadows, her long hair flowing like dark silk against the cold moonlit night. Her presence was an enigma, a mystery drawn from the depths of the night, etched into the fabric of reality. She didn't seem bothered by the biting cold, her posture unaffected by the icy wind that made me shiver. She stood there on the opposite side of the road, a silhouette against the faint glow of a distant streetlight. As I watched, she slowly turned, her movements as fluid as the night itself. Her eyes, two gleaming orbs in the darkness, met mine. A chill ran down my spine, not from the cold, but from the strange hypnotic pull of her gaze. Suddenly, she was crossing the street, her steps whisper quiet against the desolate silence of the night. Her approach was so silent, so stealthy, that I could almost believe she was gliding towards me, propelled by some unseen force. She came to a stop beside me, her eyes never leaving mine. Her lips moved, her voice barely more than a whisper, a spectral echo carried on the wind. "Do you need a ride?" she asked. Her words hung in the air, a question that seemed to echo into the emptiness around us. I was taken aback, my mind reeling from the suddenness of her offer. Before I could respond, she had already turned away, her figure disappearing into the shadows once more. But this time, she wasn't alone. A taxi had materialized from the darkness, its headlights casting long, eerie shadows across the deserted road. Without a word, she climbed into the passenger seat, leaving the door open in silent invitation. I had no choice but to follow. The night was too cold, and the taxi was my only refuge. The inside of the taxi was strangely warm, contrasting the coldness of the night outside. A strange comfort filled the air, yet it did nothing to ease my growing unease. The driver's face remained hidden, obscured by the dimness, and he didn't utter a word. His silence, unbroken save for the low hum of the engine, seemed to swallow the space around us. Beside me, the woman remained as enigmatic as when I'd first seen her. Her long hair flowed like a dark river, covering her face from view. She sat still, almost statuesque, her presence a silent specter in the passenger seat. The only sound that dared to break the silence was the occasional rustle of her coat against the leather seat. As the ride continued, the city lights became fewer and farther between. The darkness outside seemed to press against the windows, as if eager to seep into the cab. The hum of the engine became a monotonous drone, lulling in its constancy, yet unnerving in its omnipresence. My mind began to race, each thought feeding into a growing sense of dread. What if this wasn't an ordinary ride? What if this wasn't an ordinary woman? The question simmered, fueling my anxiety. I tried to shake off the feeling, to convince myself that it was nothing more than a product of my overactive imagination. But the silence, the darkness, the woman, they all seemed to echo the same chilling thought. Something was not quite right. I glanced towards the rearview mirror, hoping to catch a glimpse of the driver, to see something human, something real. But what I saw, or rather what I didn't see, made my heart pound in my chest. Where the woman's reflection should have been, there was nothing. Just the shadowy outline of the back seat, empty and dark. My heart pounded in my chest as I noticed the woman's reflection in the rearview mirror, or rather, the lack of it. A chill ran down my spine, more frigid than the night's wind. I tried to ignore the creeping dread, but it was as persistent as the cold. I turned to the woman, her long hair cascading over her face like a veil, obscuring her features. "Where are we going?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She remained silent, her gaze fixated on the road ahead, her hands steady on the wheel. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat a drum of panic. The familiar sights of the city were now replaced by an expanse of darkness, punctuated only by the few fleeting glimpses of moonlight. The one-way road seemed to stretch into infinity, leading us further into the unknown. The once comforting hum of the taxi's engine now sounded like a death knell, each rev echoing my growing fear. I tried to make sense of the situation, to rationalize my fear, but the silence, the isolation, the eerie stillness of the woman, it all felt wrong. My gut was screaming at me, a primal instinct warning me of danger. I needed to get out, to escape this nightmarish ride. In the midst of my panic, I noticed the taxi veering off the main road, leading us into an even more secluded area. The paved road gave way to gravel, the crunching sound beneath the tires amplifying the sense of dread. The surroundings became increasingly unfamiliar and ominous. Tall skeletal trees lined the sides of the road, their shadows dancing like specters in the stark headlights of the taxi. My breath hitched, the air in the taxi seeming to grow colder, denser. Every fiber of my being was now screaming at me to escape, to break free from this terrifying predicament. I reached for the door handle, my hand trembling, the cold metal biting into my skin. I took a deep breath, preparing myself for the leap into the darkness. But just as I was about to pull it, the taxi came to a sudden halt. The abrupt stop jolted me, my heart pounding in my chest. A silence fell over us, broken only by the low hum of the taxi's idling engine. The driver, shrouded in darkness, twisted around to face me. His face was a void, a black hole where features should have been. My breath hitched, a strangled gasp escaping my lips. Then, she turned. Her hair seemed to move on its own, slithering like serpents in the dim light. Her eyes, shining with an eerie, preternatural glow, held mine captive. A chill ran down my spine, my blood turning to ice in my veins. The realization crashed down on me like a tidal wave. I was trapped in a car, in the dead of night, with two beings that were far from human. The insidious whisper of fear crept into my mind, spiraling into terror. And then everything went black. Have you ever felt the icy chill of fear creep up your spine on a desolate road in the dead of night? A question that's not so far-fetched if you've ever found yourself on an isolated path, swallowed by the darkness, with nothing but the hum of your car for company. My best friend and I found ourselves in such a situation, the night air dense with silence as we navigated the gloom. The headlights of our car cut through the black canvas of the night, a beacon in the void. Then out of nowhere a figure materialized, lying motionless on the road. Our hearts pounded in our chests like a frenzied drumbeat. The car screeched to a halt, the echo reverberating through the still night. In the face of the unknown, bravery or foolishness, call it what you will, we decided to investigate. But when we stepped out to check, there was nothing at all. It was as if the shadows swallowed it whole. A shiver of confusion and fear began to creep up our spines. The night was turning into an eerie puppet show, pulling our strings, making us dance to its sinister tune. The silence around us was deafening. The only sound was the distant hum of our car engine, a mechanical heartbeat in the otherwise lifeless night. With a shared glance, we retreated to the sanctuary of our vehicle, the cold leather seats offering a strange comfort. We pushed the unsettling encounter to the back of our minds and continued to navigate the labyrinth of the dark road ahead. 2 minutes passed, each second weighed heavy with apprehension. Suddenly, the headlights illuminated another figure on the road. It was like a chilling déjà vu, our hearts pounding against our ribs. We pulled over, our breaths hitching, the cold night air filling our lungs. Again, we stopped. Again, there was nothing. Dread started to take hold. Was this a sick joke or something far more sinister? The question echoed in my mind, bouncing off the walls of my skull, amplifying the fear that was slowly seeping into my veins, replacing the blood with icy terror. It was as if we were caught in a loop, a cycle of fear, where the road was the vinyl, and we were the needle, stuck on the same haunting track, over and over again. Each time we moved, the figure reappeared, lying motionless in our path only to vanish when we dared to approach. It was a chilling game of hide and seek, played on a stage as desolate and quiet as the moon. The darkness was no longer a friend, a cloak of anonymity. It was an enemy, a shroud that concealed the unknown. The silence, once comforting, was now eerie. The usual symphony of the night was replaced with an unsettling quiet. No rustling leaves, no chirping crickets, just the low hum of the car engine and our own ragged breaths. The isolation was palpable, as if we were the last two people on Earth, trapped in a nightmare of our own making. The figures kept appearing and disappearing, like specters from another realm. Each sighting, each disappearance chipped away at our sanity. The fear was no longer a mere emotion. It was a living entity, a third passenger in our car, feeding off our paranoia, growing stronger with each passing moment. The road ahead was a menacing mystery, an abyss shrouded in darkness. The headlights of our car were like feeble eyes, struggling to pierce through the inky blackness, revealing nothing but the unending road. The isolation was our prison, the road our warden, and fear, our only companion. The questions swelled in my mind, each more terrifying than the last. Who was the figure? Why were they tormenting us? And most importantly, would we ever escape this cycle of fear? The road seemed to stretch endlessly, each minute more terrifying than the last. The terror wasn't in what we saw, but in what we didn't. As the night grew darker, our fear got its nourishment from the unseen. We were not alone on this desolate stretch of road. We felt it in the marrow of our bones. The figures we'd seen, or thought we'd seen, were not human. They were something else, something unknown, something that triggered a primal fear deep within us. We were at the mercy of the night, enveloped in an unseen terror that was as palpable as the cold night air. The figures were elusive, disappearing as quickly as they appeared. Their presence, however, lingered, a specter that haunted the empty road. It wasn't just the absence of these figures that terrified us. It was the realization that we were dealing with something that defied explanation, something that lurked in the shadows, unseen and unknown. We made the decision to turn around, to head back from where we came. We had hoped that the familiarity of the direction would provide some semblance of comfort, that it would shield us from the unseen terror. But the night had other plans. As we turned the car around, the headlights cut through the darkness, casting long shadows on the empty road. There was a silence so profound that it felt as if the world itself was holding its breath. And then, we saw it. Not a figure lying on the road, not a figment of our imagination, but something else. Something that stood upright, that looked back at us with an intensity that sent shivers down our spine. The terror wasn't just in what we didn't see anymore, it was in what we were seeing now. The unseen had become seen. The unknown had taken a form, the terror had revealed itself, but as we turned, there it was, the figure, standing. It stood unmoving, a silhouette against the moonlit road. A figure, distinct yet indistinct, a paradox of existence. It was there, rooted to the spot where so many times before, it had vanished into the ether. This time, however, it was different. This time, it stayed. The engine of the car hummed in the background, a soft counterpoint to the deafening silence of the night. The air was thick with suspense, the tension almost tangible. Our hearts pounded in our chests, a primal drumbeat echoing our fear. The figure, a mere outline against the moonlight, was an enigma, a mystery that threatened to consume us. The figure, once an ephemeral phantom, now seemed solid, real. It was a specter turned flesh, a ghost story come to life. The fear was no longer just a feeling, it was a presence, an entity, a tangible force. And then it moved towards us. But what was it? What did it want? I guess we'll never know.